Hello, this is Jane, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the July 23 issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And I'm going to start on the front page, and the headline here is, first there's a byline that says The Temporary Canadians, and the headline reads, No Turning Back. Students, workers whose families made sacrifices to send them to Canada face growing pressure as Ottawa closes doors to permanent residencies. And this is by Nicholas Keong. And let me just start too with, there's a picture of Yoel Jose. He came from India to attend college. He spent $45,000 on tuition, and his work permit expires at the end of the year. Okay. For Joel Jose's working-class parents in India, his tuition in Canada was a retirement investment and a huge gamble. His father, a farmer, and mother, a nurse, had to mortgage their family's land to scrape together the money for his 2-year social service worker diploma program at Seneca College. His graduation was delayed for one extra term because he had suffered from severe depression when he first arrived in Toronto in early 2021. The total tuition fees over 5 semesters amounted to $45,000, and Jose had to work while studying to cover the cost of books, rent, and other living expenses. The pressure to do well and ultimately earn his permanent residency in Canada has weighed heavily on Jose. His post-graduation work permit expired in January, and he is now on temporary work authorization lasting until the end of the year. You don't even know what's up next and what's left for you when you wake up, said the 25-year-old Ajax man, who has been a support worker at a group home providing personal care to kids and adults with autism, developmental delays, and brain injuries. My parents are nearly 60 and are reaching the age of retirement, added Jose, an only child. They've spent a big chunk of their savings on me and my education. They do want me to get my PR, that's permanent residence, so I could have more opportunities in life and have a better life. After cranking out study and work permits to welcome the world to Canada after the pandemic, Ottawa has reversed course. Not only has it slashed the number of permanent residence spots from 500,000 a year to 380,000, it has strived to reduce the share of temporary residents to just 5% of the country's total population by the end of 2027. Nearly 1.94 million study, work, and visitor permits are slated to expire by the end of 2026, with another 1.04 million expiring in 2027. Caught in the policy swing are people such as Jose, who are fighting to remain here as the door is closing. Experts and advocates say many temporary residents are faced with not just the struggle for immigration status amid the uncertainty, but also the tremendous family pressure to stay in Canada and the possible shame of returning home without permanent residence, the prize that drew most of them here. Coming to Canada is often not an individual choice, but a family decision. That comes with the expectations that the collective sacrifices from everyone back home will pay off when a migrant is established abroad and can one day support them in return. They can't even think about going back, said activist Jaspreet Singh, founder of the International Sikh Students Association. Almost a third of international students in Canada last year, down from the peak of 50% in 2023, came from India particularly Punjab, where Singh is from. Some of the other families have sold their house, sold their land for money. They haven't even paid their loans yet. How can they even go back? And then there's a stigma that they are a failure, right? They can't even talk face to face to their family. Singh said that for years migrants had been sold the Canadian dream of so-called edugration, earning permanent residence by way of studying and then working in the country. Education, especially shorter college programs, became a shortcut for immigration. That relatively easy pathway had worked for many, including those in low-skilled jobs, until 2 years ago when the tide turned. Ottawa reduced immigration levels amid an already strained affordable housing market and stress on other infrastructure and services, such as health care. It has become a lot harder now to get permanent residence in Canada. They are comparing themselves to those who came here in good times, lamented Singh, who arrived at Sheridan College a decade ago on a study permit and became a permanent resident in 2022. The stress is coming from everywhere. The reality is far different from what they thought. Their families now have even less resources compared to what they used to have before they came to Canada. And their college diplomas and entry-level Canadian work experience may carry little value back home upon their return, he added. Jose came to study in Canada after finishing high school in India. He is unsure what his diploma from Seneca would land him in India, where there is less opportunity in social services as people stay home to look after elderly and infirm relatives. I will be back to where I started, he said. I would have to go back to college, pursue a degree, learn other skills, and do something different, which might take another 6-7 years to rebuild my life. Maria Cervantes Machias, a research fellow at University of British Columbia's Center for Migration Studies, said, migrants come to Canada with different expectations and ambitions. Much of that, she added, is shaped by their socio-economic backgrounds and upbringing rather than their nationality. As Canada made study and work permits more accessible, it also opened the door wider to migrants from foreign backgrounds to come here to study and work, and potentially acquire permanent residence and citizenship, said Cervantes Machias, who studies international mobility. It raises the stakes of what it means to obtain PR, explained Cervantes Machias, who came from Mexico to graduate school at UBC in 2018 on a scholarship and got her permanent residence 2 years ago. For those that are in that upper middle class, there's also opportunities back home and elsewhere, so it is seen as an advancement to spend some time abroad, whereas those who came here with more stakes in staying want to stay. Canadian permanent residence and citizenship and a Canadian passport can improve mobility, but are not necessarily a must-have for those with skills that are sought after and highly transferable, she noted. Cameroonian Elvis Nadi Ade worked at as a restaurant manager and later as an account clerk in Dubai before he came to Canada in 2022 on an employer-sponsored work permit as a food service supervisor. That position used to qualify him for permanent residence with a job offer. He paid a consultant $8,000 to get him the job and has a 2-year-old son to feed. for many immigrant communities, said Nade Ade, having a son or daughter in the diaspora brings pride to the family, and returning home empty-handed could bring disgrace. Nade Ade said Canadians need to understand where many of the temporary residents are coming from and be honest about how the immigration system attracts students and workers to the country by dangling a chance at permanent residence as bait. Nobody leaves their family, their friends, to go somewhere just on a temporary basis, said the 37-year-old who works in a rural community in Ontario. His work permit expires next year with no permanent status in sight. People will not invest huge sums of money to come here for temporary reasons. It might be what's stated on paper, but practically should be, because for you to attract people, you have to tell them what you have in stock for them. You have to have health care. You have to have permanent residency. Otherwise, they won't come. Nade Ade said he is still trying to figure out a plan B, betting on his wife, a medical lab technologist, getting an invitation for permanent residence with her health-related background. But if push comes to shove, he would have to return home and face the music, because it is impossible for his young family to live here undocumented. I can only adapt to the fast-changing times, he said. If the worst comes to the worst, going back home would not be a death penalty. This next article is also on the front page under the byline of trade. Dozens of goods on tariff list aren't exported to U.S. Scattershot range of targeted products points to Trump strategy, experts say. And this is by Reza Patel. Nearly 1 in 6 products captured by U.S. President Donald Trump's latest tariff spree are goods Canada doesn't export to the United States, Canadian officials recently told Ottawa's Economic Advisory Council. Something experts say may shed light on the thinking behind Washington's strategy. Jean Simard, head of the Aluminum Association of Canada and a member of Prime Minister Mark Carney's Canada-U.S. Advisory Council, told the Star on Tuesday that officials conveyed to members that 85 of the 555 targeted products are goods Canada does not sell to the United States. For Simard, that was evidence that Trump's newest trade escalation had all the makings of a pressure tactic designed to squeeze Canada further. A spokesperson for Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc wouldn't share the list of products with the Star, only writing in a statement that LeBlanc and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer had spoken on Tuesday and would continue discussions. An independent analysis of U.S. trade data also found at least 40 products on the list that recorded no Canadian imports in one or both of the past 2 years. This move is not a laser-focused, highly strategic, hit them in the underbelly where it'll really pinpoint hurt, said Jennifer Robson, an associate professor of political management at Carleton University, who conducted the analysis. To me, there's stuff in here that even if we do make it, even if we are exporting it to the United States, it's a fairly scattershot list, Robson added. This is about how do we generally gum up the trade relationship at the border and create a lot of uncertainty. Trump on Monday slapped 50% tariffs on a wide range of Canadian goods, normally shielded by the Canada, U.S., Mexico Free Trade Agreement, with the duties set to be applied on August 19. His administration imposed the tariffs under an obscure section of the U.S. Tariff Act of 1930, arguing that the move was necessary to counter discriminatory trade practices Canada has undertaken targeting American autos and alcohol since Trump initiated a trade dispute last year, and to address long-standing irritants around Canadian dairy. The escalation is estimated to affect about $28 billion, or 5% of goods exported annually south of the border. That's $28 billion worth. The list includes politically sensitive products such as alcohol and dairy, and products from sectors such as forestry and electronics manufacturing. It also appears to focus on provinces that pulled U.S. liquor from store shelves, yet questions remain about why many items were included. Some of this is not just bluster, said Unifor National President Lana Payne. That doesn't mean the broader move isn't outrageous, she said. Natural sponges of animal origin, gelling agent agar-agar, a rare essential oil derived from irises, and whole bovine skins or hides are among Robson's list of products that were caught up in the latest round of tariffs but did not account for any Canadian exports to the U.S. in 2025. International trade lawyer Lawrence Herman said the lack of legitimacy behind Trump's escalation is appalling. However, despite the seemingly haphazard nature of the list, which also includes products such as horsehair and flower bulbs, Herman said he believes the conscious targeting of certain provinces and sectors shows the slate was carefully curated. They have a lot of people digging into this matter, and they've devised the list accordingly, Herman said. My view is you can't trust the U.S. Their signature on a trade deal isn't worth very much, and what we're looking at in the future is basically a shifting, unstable relationship, Herman said. Payne, the union president, echoed Carney by saying Canada must get to the negotiating table and then consider further action if the tariff orders aren't rescinded next month. Stand firm, hold the line, no more concessions, and let's see if we can't get this worked out. If we can't, and in 28 days we are facing a slew of more tariffs from the United States, then Canada is going to have to make a different decision, and that means it's going to have to be ready and willing to use other leverage to push back, said Payne, who also sits on Ottawa's Canada-U.S. Advisory Council. On Wednesday, Greer defended Trump's actions, telling the U.S. Senate Finance Committee that the president's trade policy was characterized by a national emergency, a $1.2 trillion trade deficit. The national emergency still persists, and so our policy remains the same, Greer said. The specific authorities this administration is using have changed, but the trade strategy has not. We are committed to continuing to use tariffs and to negotiate deals to support the re-industrialization of our economy, protect American workers, and increase their wages and shrink our trade deficit. Democratic Senator Ron Wyden, a senior member of the committee, said Wednesday that the Trump administration had lost the plot on its tariff strategy, referencing Monday's orders against Canada. Wyden introduced a bill in the Republican-controlled Senate on the same day seeking to constrain Trump's authority over tariffs and give Congress more power over trade policy. And I need to pause here to remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And also from the front page, we have a Star exclusive Liberal strategist to co-chair Chow's re-election campaign. Move signals change in tactics in battle with Bradford. And this is by Ben Spur. A prominent Liberal advisor who helped Prime Minister Mark Carney to victory in last year's federal election will play a leading role in Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow's 2026 municipal campaign, the Star has learned. Andrew Bevin, who was co-director of the Federal Liberals' 2025 National Electoral Push and a top aide to former Ontario Liberal Premier Kathleen Wynne, will co-chair Chow's re-election bid this fall. The mayor's campaign confirmed. Michael Hay, the former Progress Toronto executive director, who has been on parental leave as Chow's chief of staff, will be the other co-chair. Appointing Bevin to such a senior position signals a change in approach for Chow, a former New Democrat MP with deep ties to the party whose successful 2023 mayoral campaign was led by Hay and other strategists with NDP roots. It suggests that as she faces off in the October 26 vote against a more conservative candidate, Beach's East York Councillor Brad Bradford, she's pinning her re-election hopes on winning over more centrist Torontonians who often vote Liberal. The federal Liberal campaign that Bevin helped steer last year won 23 of the city's 24 ridings. Bevin's involvement also sets up a municipal echo of the federal clash between Carney and his main rival, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. While Bradford's campaign includes strategists with links to both the Conservatives and the Liberals, his campaign manager, John Sinclair, is Poilievre's former deputy chief of staff. In an interview, Bevin said it would be an oversimplification to conclude he's being brought on to help Chow court Liberal supporters. He acknowledged, however, that this year is obviously a very different campaign than 2023, when a record 102 people ran for mayor and the center-right vote splintered between a handful of candidates. As the most high-profile progressive, Chow consolidated left-leaning support and won with about 37% of the vote. As of Wednesday, just over 30 candidates had signed up to run for mayor. While there is still time for one of them to surge to prominence or for a new big-name challenger to enter the contest, the 2026 election is shaping up to be a two-horse race between Chow and Bradford. You could win last time with a much lower percentage than is going to be required this time, said Bevin, who was an advisor to former Scarborough Liberal MPP Mitzi Hunter's mayoral campaign in 2023. He said this time there's a chance for Chow to assemble a winning progressive coalition that's made up of folks of many different political stripes, but especially progressive Liberals and NDP voters. And so certainly I hope to be helpful on that front, he said, adding that he believes Chow has already expanded her support beyond NDP backers. Some of Chow's progressive base might chafe at her teaming up with a strategist who recently helped elect Carney. The Prime Minister's rollback of environmental legislation, embrace of pipelines, and reversal of tax measures aimed at the wealthy have sparked backlash even among left-leaning members of his own party. However, Bevin, who is considered to be on the Liberals' progressive wing, rejected the notion that his role on Chow's campaign is a sign she's abandoning her values. He argued he's just one person on her team. I'm not changing where the mayor is coming from or what she's had to offer in the past and what she has received, he said. Chow's campaign didn't directly respond to questions about whether she plans to tack to the center in this election. Campaign spokesperson Shirvan Rizvani said in an email they would have more to say about her team when she formally launches her campaign in the fall. While Chow registered for the race in May and has rolled out policies that appear geared for the election, she has said she remains focused on running the city. We have a strong team whose experience includes progressive campaigns here in Toronto and across the country, Rizvani said. Chow and Bevin noted, have a long-standing working relationship that goes back decades and includes working on national child care together in the 1990s. Bevin and Hay also worked closely in the 2024 to deliver federal refugee funding for the city when he was chief of staff to then Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, and Hay was in the mayor's office. Bevin isn't the only Liberal advisor helping Chow's re-election bid. Lloyd Rang, a former communications director to Ontario Premier Dalton McGuinty, will be a senior advisor. Carla Weber Gallagher, the mayor's chief of staff, is scheduled to go on leave in the coming weeks to manage Chow's campaign. She was previously principal secretary to Ontario NDP leader Andrea Horwath. Nadine Techevskaya, a Union and New Democrat strategist, will be chief financial officer. I'm sorry I messed that name up. Rizvani, the mayor's deputy chief of staff and former media relations director with the Ontario NDP, is on leave from City Hall to run communications for her campaign. Next article is titled Man Faces Terrorism Charges Over Protests, and this is by Xavier Mesquita. A Toronto man has been charged with a terrorism-related offense following an investigation by Toronto police and the RCMP into his alleged conduct at pro-Palestinian demonstrations. Police say that his conduct included making statements advocating for harm against members of the Israeli and Jewish communities. Ahmad Hassan Ajamad, a 33-year-old, was arrested Tuesday and charged with participating in or contributing to the activities of a terrorist group, police said Wednesday. According to investigators, on May 25 and September 7, 2024, Hajamad attended demonstrations in the area of Bay Street and Front Street West, where, they allege, he used amplification devices to make public statements advocating detestation of and harm against members of the Israeli and Jewish communities. Police say they executed a search warrant at a Toronto residence on March 7, 2025, seizing multiple electronic devices. A subsequent joint investigation by the Toronto Police Service Hate Crime Unit and the RCMP's Integrated National Security Enforcement Team gathered evidence supporting the allegation that he acted for the benefit of and in association with Hamas, the release said. Investigations into criminal offenses committed at demonstrations do not end when the event is over, Toronto Police Chief Myron Demkiw said. We will continue to hold those who break the law accountable, no matter how long it takes. And before I go to the next article, I'm going to briefly remind you you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. All right, the next article is titled, Bar Stripped of License for Buying Stolen Booze. Owner said he was trying to keep the peace with homeless encampment. And this is by Raju Madar. An Etobicoke bar lost its liquor license because it was buying and serving alcohol stolen by people living in a nearby homeless encampment, going so far as to put in orders for certain kinds of booze, according to an Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario ruling. In seeking to retain his license, the bar's owner said he was trying to find a way to make peace with the nearby encampment and, despite admitting to buying the booze, said it didn't reflect badly on his judgment and that the bar should be allowed to remain open. Southside Johnny's Bar and Grill at 3653 Lakeshore Boulevard West is owned and operated by John Theodoro Kakas and was managed by Yasmin Gomes. According to the Commission's ruling released on July 16, the owner and manager purchased stolen alcohol that was served in the bar and also used for personal consumption for several months before May 2025. The probe was handled by investigators in the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario's Major Case Office and a Halton police officer who surveyed thieves going from several LCBO stores and returning to the rear of the bar to sell the purloined bottles. Gomes testified that she paid the man $70 for the 2 bottles of Appleton rum and that she presumed they were stolen. The LCBO incident report of May 21, 2025 reports the value of the rum at $71.90 each for a total of $143.80, said the AGCO's ruling. Gomes confirmed in her oral testimony that during the transaction for the Appleton's rum, the man asked her if she wanted anything, to which she replied that she could use some Jägermeister. The decision continued. Theodora Kakas said he struck a deal to purchase the stolen goods in an attempt to keep the peace and mollify people living at a nearby encampment who had previously come into the bar to use the bathroom and harass customers to buy the stolen alcohol. Theodora Kakas said that the purchases took place for about 6 months before May 2025, while Gomes said it had been going on for about a year. Theodora Kakas told the authorities about how the people in the encampment had been known to steal from nearby businesses and said he initially refused to buy the alcohol, which resulted in his business being targeted. He testified that his initial refusal to buy the stolen items was met with retaliation by the encampment actors. They stole his vehicle license plates, damaged his vehicle, wrote graffiti on his back fence, upset a flower box, and left human feces at the front entrance of the establishment, the documents said. He stated they caused $5,000 to $6,000 in damage to his property. He feared for his safety and the safety of his employees, and therefore resorted to buying their loot to prevent further disturbance. The adjudicator, Bruce Stanton, found this part of Theodora Kakis's testimony credible, saying that while it was an attempt to keep the peace with the neighborhood gang, it does not justify buying the stolen alcohol, and that he should have attempted other recourse, like calling the police, to try to stop the harassment. Theodora Kakis said he had been operating the business without incident for 21 years and held a liquor license for 40 years with a clean record, and that the purchases of stolen goods were for personal use. The adjudicator said Theodora Kakis was made well-intentioned but ill-considered attempts at keeping the peace with the encampment. He also said that he was dealing with family illnesses which caused him to be less involved in the bar's day-to-day business. He warned that revoking the license would be a death knell for Southside Johnny's, and despite his poor judgment, buying the stolen goods does not impede the appellant's ability to carry on business in accordance with the law and with integrity and honesty. The adjudicator disagreed and revoked the establishment's license. Purchasing stolen liquor is a serious breach of integrity that not only violates the law but compromises public safety and introduces illegal goods into Ontario's regulated alcohol market, said Karen Schnarr, Chief Executive Officer and Registrar of the AGCO, in the initial December 2025 announcement regarding the investigation. Efforts by the Star to reach Southside Johnny's Theodora Kakis and Gomes were unsuccessful. On the Southside Johnny's Facebook page, there was a post saying the bar is undergoing renovations. Southside Johnny's will be temporarily closed for the next few weeks while we work behind the scenes on an exciting new chapter, it says. Big changes are coming. Thank you for your continued support, patience, and loyalty. This community means everything to us, and we can't wait to raise a glass with you again soon. The next article is under the byline of Queen's Park. Piccini's office defends spending. Records show Labor Ministers' Riding Association spent $40,000 on meals, sushi rolling classes. And this is by Maura Welsh. Labor Minister David Piccini's Central Ontario Riding Association spent $40,000 in, quote, meetings, unquote, that included sushi rolling classes, Epicurean dining across Toronto, and expenses related to a Florida golf course as a fundraising from donations surged in 2024, financial records show. As Piccini faces an ongoing investigation by the Ontario Integrity Commissioner over funding approvals he made for the province's $2.5 billion Skills Development Fund, his Queen's Park office is defending the minister's Northumberland Peterborough South Riding Association for how it used donations from progressive conservative supporters. The Riding Association is a political entity, his office stressed, while the local constituency office is meant to serve all residents and is government funded. Asked by the Star about the expenses in Florida and Toronto restaurants, Piccini's spokesperson Michelle Figueredo said members of all political stripes are allocated budgets from the money they fundraise. that their riding associations use to support their role in the community, including volunteer engagement, fundraising, stakeholder outreach, and hosting community events. As it relates to the expenses referenced, MPP Piccini regularly meets with constituents, community leaders, advocacy groups, and nonprofit organizations to discuss local, regional, and provincial issues, Figueiredo said. He also hosts events to thank volunteers and board members. These events include pub nights, pasta making, sushi rolling class, lunches, and other events that can take place in Northumberland, Peterborough, South, or in the rare case that they are traveling out of the province. The expenses of Premier Doug Ford's ministers have come under increased scrutiny following last week's resignation from cabinet of Willowdale MPP Stan Cho. A Global News report revealed he had claimed $16,203 in Toronto hotel expenses over 3 years under a separate set of expense rules. Although Cho's expenses were technically allowable, Ford said claiming them had been a mistake and ordered all progressive conservative MPPs who represent GTA ridings to repay hotel expense claims made over the past 3 years. Under Ontario's Election Finances Act, registered riding associations are required to file financial statements with Elections Ontario, but are not required to disclose expenses directly to donors or explain how their contributions were spent. Elections Ontario found nothing irregular in the annual filing of the Northumberland Peterborough South riding. The riding documents show expenses of $1,840 for Toronto's Roll This Way, which offers classes on making sushi and dumplings with karaoke on the side, and $1,572 at National Bowl and Arcade and Bowling Lounge at The Well on Spadina Avenue. The association also billed $541 for meals at the Jacaranda Golf Club in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and claimed $350 at Tekato Restaurant, which is located several miles away on North Fort Lauderdale Beach Boulevard. An Elections Ontario spokesperson said there is nothing in the Election Finances Act that prohibits where expenses are incurred. In a testament to the culinary options available in downtown Toronto, Piccini's Riding Association billed $1,732 for, quote, meals, unquote, for farm-to-table dining at Richmond Station, $1,364 at the Jason George Restaurant, and $1,061 at the College St. Mercado. Another $237 was spent at the acclaimed but short-lived Antonio Park Restaurant, noted for its Japanese, Korean, and South American-influenced offerings, which was on the 51st floor of Manulife Center. The Elections Ontario documents also offer a perspective on Piccini's evolution as a fundraiser. Stored in the, quote, public scrutiny, unquote, room at the Elections Ontario office in Don Mills, the paper documents show that after Ford appointed Piccini to lead the Labor Ministry in the fall of 2023, fundraising increased. In 2023, the Riding Association reported $269,155 in contributions in its 2024 annual return. The association listed $449,471 in contributions, which included 4 fundraising events, one with special guest Doug Ford and another billed as Get It Done with MPP David Piccini. The Star has reviewed the expenses of Piccini's Riding Association, but has not yet examined those of riding associations for other Ford cabinet members. NDP leader Merritt Stiles said the expenses from Piccini's Riding Association filings highlight what she sees as a growing sense of political regress. This shows extremely poor judgment, Stiles said. PC members aren't donating to their party so Ford's cabinet ministers can live like rock stars. Minister Piccini owes Ontarians an explanation. And before I start the next article, I must remind you again that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And the headline for the next article reads, Support Grows for Ford's Pipeline. Manitoba Premier sees merit in proposed Northern Energy Corridor from Alberta to Ontario. And this is by Rob Ferguson. Doug Ford came to the annual Premier's Conference looking to boost the odds for his proposed Northern Shield pipeline from Alberta's oil hub to refineries in Sarnia. He did. The idea is getting a warmer reception from Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew as provincial leaders meet in the face of a new Trump tariff threat. He understands, Ford told the Star in an interview Wednesday. He hasn't committed 100%, but I'm confident it's going in the right direction because he understands that we need energy sovereignty, we need energy independence, and economic stability. Kinew said employment prospects are swaying him to the merits of an energy corridor that would pass through Saskatchewan and his province on an all-Canada route to southwestern Ontario, not through the United States like existing pipelines. I'm open to it, Kinew said. Having spent a few days in Portage la Prairie, Manitoba, last week, I can tell you there's probably a lot of people who'd like to work on a pipeline, he added on the way into a day-long meeting with other premiers and territorial leaders talking about trade, health care, raging wildfires, affordability, and other matters. If it's going to make Canada stronger, great. The 3,300-kilometer pipeline was proposed earlier this month by Ford and his Alberta counterpart, Danielle Smith, with a feasibility study due by year's end, although critics note the project lacks a private sector proponent and could cost taxpayers $33 billion. Environmental groups say the timing is curious, with the country facing out-of-control wildfires fueled by the effects of climate change. Smith said she was delighted to hear Premier Kinew express some support as her province looks to get more of its oil and natural gas to market. Ford touts the corridor as a critical next step in building a more united, more prosperous, and more resilient Canada that could create 10,000 jobs, use Canadian steel, and see the country refine more of its own oil instead of exporting it for others to profit from the processing. We go through about 400,000 barrels a day in Ontario. If we ship in 500,000, wouldn't it be great that we don't have to worry about what's going on over in the Middle East, and we could have a reserve, Ford added in the interview. When Canoe first responded to the pipeline concept weeks ago, he issued a terse statement cautioning that major nation-building projects have to be built the right way. He expanded on that Wednesday. We want indigenous governments on side. We want workers taken care of. We want the environmental concerns all looked after. Those will be the conversations we have. There is the possibility of a branch lineup to Churchill in northern Manitoba for exporting oil through Hudson Bay. Talks have taken place at senior level between Ford's office and Canoe's, with Ontario stressing it wants to be respectful of Manitoba's timelines and priorities. Despite the tariff distraction, conference host Prince Edward Island Premier Rob Lance said leaders discussed the need for more federal healthcare funding, including 5% annual increases in the Canada Health Transfer and help with energy security in addition to interprovincial and international trade. PEI, for example, is having trouble at times meeting peak demand for electricity and needs financial support to replace undersea cables bringing power from New Brunswick. The Northwest Territories, Yukon, and Nunavut are looking to increase their own generation and connect to the southern Canadian grid, reducing a reliance on diesel-generated electricity. We are very keen to work with the federal government to advance their goal to see a doubling of the grid by 2050, said Yukon Premier Curry Dixon, adding that more electricity is needed to foster the development of critical minerals and protect Arctic sovereignty, including military facilities in the shifting geopolitical climate. The prospect of the hefty new American tariffs of 50% on $28 billion of Canadian products starting August 19 has focused the premiers as they prepare to meet in person Thursday with Prime Minister Mark Carney, said Lance. There is a new level of urgency. While the Prime Minister gave an emergency virtual briefing about the tariffs on Tuesday afternoon, Ford said he's looking for a specific plan to deal with the threat that has prompted him to call for dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariffs and to hold firm on a U.S. booze ban that infuriates the Trump administration. I take a harder line because we get hurt the most. Our auto sector is getting hurt. Our steel sector, our manufacturing sector, the Premier added. We are taking the hit more than any other province. The next article is titled New Study Delves into Opioid Deaths by Occupation. Construction and trades workers disproportionately affected by crisis. And this is by Nicole Thompson. Researchers hope a new report examining the occupations of people who have died of opioid overdoses in Ontario raises awareness about the breadth of the population affected by the drug epidemic. The study found more than a third of the opioid-related deaths between 2018 and 2024, where the person's occupation was known, were people who worked in construction or the trades. That's roughly 1,340 people. Overall, opioid deaths in Ontario for that time period totaled nearly 16,000. But the coroner only recorded the occupations in about 22% of the cases. Tara Gomes, principal investigator with the Ontario Drug Policy Research Network, said the research reaffirms previous findings that construction workers are disproportionately affected by the opioid epidemic. But she notes the research also shows the rate of opioid deaths was similar for workers in natural resources and agriculture. Data shows roughly 32 opioid deaths per 100,000 natural resources workers in 2024, compared to 54.5 opioid deaths per 100,000 construction workers that same year. The total number of workers in natural resources and agriculture is much smaller than those in construction and the trades, meaning that demographic may have been previously overlooked. The researchers said occupations where there is more risk for injury, precarious employment, and shift work could be factors that make people more vulnerable. The rate among hospitality workers, also worryingly high, researchers say was 8.9 deaths per 100,000 workers in 2024. I think a lot of people have a picture in their mind as to the opioid toxicity crisis who is experiencing loss of life, Gomes said, adding that in some cases there may be a link between people's overdose use and their working conditions. For example, she noted that the occupations most affected by opioid deaths often don't come with job security or health benefits. If you don't have prescription drug benefits and you experience pain, then are you able to pay for prescribed opioids, she said. And if you're not, then are you turning to the illicit drug supply to help manage that pain? That's certainly a concern in sectors like construction and trades, but could be in the case in retail and hospitality as well. Of those in construction and the trades, 49% had cocaine in their system at the time of their death, while nearly 23% had amphetamine in their system. For those in hospitality, the rates were nearly 45% and 22%. And I will have to end here with, you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the July 23 issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Jane. Thank you for listening.